Now, in the first sermon, we talked about, what Jeremiah said to the Jews who were in exile at the time in Persia. And we learned that, Jeremiah told them that they need to engage the city. They need to seek the good and prosperity of the city. And what he told them is that if your city prospers, then you prosper. And we say that if Nairobi prospers, we prosper. In the second sermon, we went a little bit further and saw how the Jews who were in exile applied this word in their situation that they were in and how they began to prosper. And in it, we came out with 3 takeouts. The first one was build, the second one was plant, and the third one was marry. All right? We learned that build is about owning spaces, owning, the spaces in the society, owning property in the society. What this does, it makes you a stakeholder. And when you're a stakeholder, you will seek the good of the city. The second thing in plant, we said that we need to engage in the economy of the city. In marry, we talked about that we need to marry so that we can increase our influence over the city. Today, we continue with this story of Esther as told in Esther chapter 4 from verse 1 to 17. For those of you who are old school like me, you can turn to your Bibles. But for those of you who have gone digital, click to Esther chapter 4 verse 1 to 17. And we'll read together. If you don't have a Bible, you can always look at the screens. But before we read this, let me just give context to what we are reading today. Before this point, this passage that we're just about to read, we had learned last week about King Xerxes. King Xerxes was the ruler of Persia at the time. And we learned that King Xerxes had appointed a gentleman by the name of Haman to be lord over everything, to rule the land on his behalf. Now, when King Xerxes did this, he did not realize who Haman was. Haman was just a vile person. He had an ego that needed to be stroked. And there was a decree that everyone had to bow to Haman. But in the process of this, one day when he was going around, he learned that there was this gentleman by the name of Mordecai who was not heeding to this, and he was being rebellious. Upon further investigation, he learns who his people are. And he decides, I will not only punish Mordecai, but I will get rid of the entire Jewish tribe or people, as a result. And that's where we are. And that's where we are as we get to this. And let's read from Esther chapter 4, verse 1 to 17. And I'll be reading from the NIV version. It's a long read, so please bear with me. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. When Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, depending on where you're from, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to her attendant, as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was in mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. Verse 7, Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all the Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come for 30 days. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you are in a palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you are made queen for just such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same, and then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. As I look at the central characters in this passage, Mordecai and Esther, I am very impressed by the responses that they give in light of the situation that they were in. There's a decree that has been passed that they are doomed for destruction, that they are to be killed, that their generation and their tribe and their people were to be wiped out. And it's a time of so much distress. But the response that Mordecai gives here is very classic. I mean, I try to think of us and what kind of response that I would give. And it would be very different from what Mordecai gave. You see, Mordecai, being in the position that he was in, he could have just asked for a favor. He would say, hey, see, you are the queen. I am an official. I will just go and make sure with the king that we are good and that we will not be wiped out. He did not think about himself. Another thing that Mordecai could have done here is he could have fled. After all, he was a government official, meaning that he had so many resources, at his beckoning. He could have left in the night, got out of the city walls, and disappeared to a different land and preserved himself. But Mordecai stays put and fights. He doesn't fight just for himself, but he fights for his entire nation, for the good of the city of Susa. As I look across this room, I see people who are just like me. You see, we have worked hard to be where we're at. And we might not be like super wealthy, but we do have some resources. And our resources allow us the luxury of either keeping ourselves from what is going on in society or running away from it, shielding ourselves from what's going on in society. And when things rise up, we are tempted to respond in various ways. And one way is we tailor-make and craft solutions to self-preserve ourselves from the problems that are going on in our society. What we do is we pick up our phone. In fact, in your discussions, you will realize that what we do is we pick up the phone and we ask ourselves, who can sort me out? Who do I know that can help me get out of the jam that I am in. Most of us look for someone who can help us to solve the issue for ourselves. We endeavor to preserve only ourselves. A second thing that I see is that we are prone to fleeing. I remember in the first sermon I spoke about what my parents did in 2007 because they sensed that there was something happening and they were like, this place, it's not going to be good. So what we do, babe, my dad telling my mom, babe, skiza, this is what we're going to do, babe. Yeah, that's how they talk, by the way. My parents have got swag like that, So dad tells mom, babe, it's going to be bad over here. We can't get caught up in this. So immediately they voted. The first thing they did was get into their car and they drove across the border. So while Kenya was burning, they were very safe in the comforts of somewhere else. Another thing we like to do is to flee from the problems is, for example, I think of the public school system. The public school system nowadays is not what it used to be before. So my children are in private school. And most of my peers right now, all our children are in private school. In fact, when we are talking, you mention the school. Yeah, Rose of Sharon, or Hillcrest, and we like to mention this and let everybody know where they're at. It doesn't matter how much you're struggling for that kid to be there. In fact, the second job that you're getting, this little side hustle, is because you're paying too much for the private school. For some of us, it could be the public health system. It is failing. If something happened to you today, none of you would want to get caught up in our national hospital. It's the biggest hospital in this region, but it's full of problems. I mean, there's so much horror stories that we hear from that space. But we work hard, get a good job with good benefits, or if we have a business, we ensure we have a good cover, so that when something happens, we just swipe at Princess Zara Pavilion, Aga Khan. Or for some of us, Nairobi Hospital. We have crafted just many clever solutions. And these solutions have removed us from the issues that are happening in our society today. Sam, if you can put for me verse 1. In verse 1, Mordecai doesn't just stay put. He decides to own the problem. His first response to this decree is he goes into a period of mourning. He mourns, he cries, and he just doesn't do it like the way we would normally do in the comforts of our home. He rips his clothes off. That's what it says over there. He rips his clothes off. He wears burlap and pours on himself ashes. And he takes to the streets to wail and mourn. He does not only go to the streets, but he goes to the palace gate. He does this in public, where his people are. He does not shield himself from the problems that his people are facing. Instead, he enters their territory and identifies with them. He doesn't see the problem as my problem or their problem. He sees the problem as our problem. And Mordecai says, because this is our problem, we need to find a collective solution to our problem. Esther's response is just as intriguing. You see, at first, Esther does not immediately move to cooperate with Mordecai. I mean, after all, there are issues. She cannot approach the king just like that. There's protocol that he has to call you. So Esther is in a space where she feels like, this story of yours, I cannot connect with it. But Mordecai just calls Esther back to her Jewish roots. And what he says to her is, don't let your being queen get to your head. I've paraphrased that. That's in verse 11. Don't let your being queen get to your head. When matters become difficult, when finally they are carrying out this decree, somehow your identity will be revealed. And when your identity is revealed, they will call for your head too. Your rise to the position of queen might be providential for the rescue of Jews. And do not imagine for a second, in verse 12, that by not complying, you can derail God's plan. Mordecai tells her that. He says that the help will come from elsewhere, but by then, you and your family and your people would have been destroyed. Mavuno Downtown, my one message to you is this. God has placed you just where you are. Be part of the change. Esther needed to be transformed from being just a beauty queen into the savior of her people. And once Mordecai had gained her attention, they began to construct a plan to overturn Haman's plot. And what Esther does is she opens up the circles that she has, not just for Mordecai, but for the sake of her people. She asks herself, who are the people that I know who can help them? What resources do I have that I can leverage for the sake of others? How can I use my position to bring meaningful change for them? This is how we're supposed to think. Not about self-preservation, but for the good of our city. She engages in prayer and a fast and then musters all her boldness to approach the king. And when we read on, and we'll take on from there next week, eventually the king intervenes and the Jews are saved. Like Mordecai, Esther owns the greater problem and responds by opening up her networks. Now, as I think about the challenges of our city, the traffic jam, the alcohol abuse, the drug abuse, the corruption, the garbage that fills, some of the areas in our city, the broken system of governance, how selfish some of our leaders are, I can't help but just be overwhelmed. The truth is, I do not know where to start. And I have a feeling that we are all in this place because it's just too overwhelming. There's just so much going on that we do not know where to engage. So that's why we are where we are. Shut ourselves in our conclave of safety, self-preservation, keeping away from the issues of the city. But Mavuno Downtown, look what Mordecai did in the time of a serious challenge. His first response was to mourn and cry to God for his city. This really challenged me because I had to ask myself that tough question. When did I mourn and cry for my city? The truth is that I've perfected the art of complaining. I have even learned, because I am a pastor, to put it in such a brilliant way on Twitter so that you can get the message, but It's not really that I was complaining or whining. Mordecai mourned for the city. He cried to God for the city. And when he explains to Esther, and Esther gets on board, the first thing she says is, fast for the city. Go and tell the people to fast for 3 days. Fast for me as I go and approach the king. It is very clear that these people had a passion for their people. Mavuno Downtown, I want to ask us, what about us? How do we develop this passion? How do we become so passionate for our people that our first response is to turn to God? If you do not know where to start, the first thing to do is just ask God to give you passion for your city. Ask him that he would make you passionate, even if not just for the whole city, for a portion that affects you directly. You can start with the small area that is around you. This piece of text over here teaches me a couple of things. And the first one it teaches me is to build and share networks. The only reason deliverance came is because Mordecai knew who was in his network. He had somebody. He knew somebody. And even as he used this network, he did not use it for himself, but he used it for the good of the city. The good thing about this story is that the person he knew was the queen who knew the king, who was above Haman, the one who was trying to destroy them. When the decree came out and they went into their mourning, the Jews did not know that there were 3 degrees of separation from their salvation. How many degrees of separation are we from our salvation or from the salvation of our city? As I look around here and I think about everybody here, I know that there's somebody here who's struggling with something. There's a gentleman there who raised his hand when I said judicial processes, court cases. I am willing to bet that your solution is right in this space, that somebody just needs to share their network. There are some people here who are suffering, have got illnesses, or know somebody who has some kind of sickness that has got them down and they're suffering. Yet there's somebody here who can be the solution for this person. There's somebody here who's seeking a job opportunity. And whenever we call for prayers, and I normally stand right here, so many people come up to me and they say, Pasi, pray for me. I need a job. I have been jobless for a long time. The solutions are in this space. There's some of us who are seeking business opportunities. We need to build and share our networks. In fact, I suspect that if I was to decide no more preaching and that we're going to sit here and guys bring up their issues, we could solve all our issues just like that. But then there is also a flip side to this. There are so many of us who find sweet deals You get this sweet deal, and this deal just takes you from point A to point Z, not even point B, but from point A to point Z. And all of a sudden, we were all praying together, and now it just looks like, hiya, we are on our own. This guy is driving a sijui what. What happened? And we have this tendency, just God opened our door. He's been good to me. Hallelujah. This is very evident in our Kenyan society, by the way. And I didn't learn this until I left this country and saw our people outside this country. Everybody else from all the other countries used to cooperate, and they would all prosper together. But we did not share our resources with each other. We need to change this, even as Kenyans. You must realize that your position, like Esther, may very well be providential for the rescue of God's people in the city of Nairobi, Mavuno downtown. You are somebody's Esther. You are somebody's Mordecai. God has placed you just where you are. Be part of the change. I said God has placed you just where you are. Be part of the change. A final lesson I see from this is that we must enter the structures if we are to engage the structures. Mordecai was an official in the government. Esther was the king's wife. We need to be in these structures so that we can influence these structures. This is where our salvation will come from. This is how we'll be able to seek the good of the city. We need some people in those positions of power who can make decisions that are God-centered and are for the good of the city and not for personal gain. We, as Mavuno Church, have decided that in the next 10 years, we are going to bring impact to the city of Nairobi. And my prayer is that each one of you who's listening to this, and even the ones in the second service, will engage in this. We have decided we are going to affect two areas in our society. The first one is the prison. In the month of September, every weekend, we are going to go to one of the major prisons in Nairobi. I pray that each one of you is going to engage in this. One of the things that we'd like to do is we would like to engage whoever is a lawyer, whoever is a doctor. We're going to do those pro bono law things to help them with their issues. And then we're also going to do free health clinics for them. They need clothes, they need books. We can't do this on our own. We're counting on you to be part of this. If you have this kind of resource, I encourage you, go to the back and just fill in something and just say, hey, I want to be part of this. This is what I'm going to do. The second thing is we're going to engage the school system. Mavuno Crossroads, which is the latest Mavuno church, is already doing this. And they are bringing impact to Lavington Primary School. They came into a space and they have changed it and transformed it. In fact, this past weekend, their members were painting walls in the school. That public school is turning. They're engaging with the teachers. In fact, one of their members is the head of the PTA. That public school, I believe, will turn to be the best public school in this city. But we too, are looking for one that we as a congregation can engage in so that we can impact our society. So remember this, Mavuno Downtown. Build and share your networks. And the second thing is engage the structures. God has placed you just where you are. Be part of the change. If you can, rise to your feet.